Welcome to TRC's live version of an interview for our Living Landmark campaign. Just a little bit of information about our Living Landmark campaign. We have posted a virtual platform for you all to go and explore the historical Wabash Y and see exactly what unique and fascinating history has happened here. There are plenty of pictures, there's 3 videos, and you can virtually walk through and see how this gorgeous place looks after it had been restored. But here today, we are going to be doing a interview with a historian, and we want to engage with one another in conversation and just really talk about why this type of work matters and why this building and this neighborhood is so important in history. So I'm gonna have my guest here introduce himself and then we'll get started.
Okay. Hello, I'm Lionel Kimble. I'm the Associate Professor of History at Chicago State University, but I'm also the Vice President for Programs for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History.
Okay, awesome. And so what makes you passionate about the work that you do in history?
Well, I think I had the benefit. I was born and raised in Chicago. I went to school in Iowa, but for most of my adult life, I've lived in Chicago. My grandparents grew up in this neighborhood over on 39th and Dearborn. They came here well before World War I. And I teach classes on Black Chicago, and one of the things we talk about is the Great Migration, our migration stories. And I would like to say that, my story isn't one of agriculture in the South. My story is of the South Side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. My ancestral home is in Bronzeville, as I like to make the joke about it. And this building, this neighborhood has been part of me for as long as I can remember.
Awesome. And what is, I think, the most important thing that people should know that occurred in this area in Bronzeville, and more specifically the Wabash YMCA that we're currently sitting in right now?
I think that's a good question. I think the most important thing for me is the association was founded by Carter G. Woodson, that we know who was the father of Black history.
Right.
But I think the largest story about Woodson, the building, and Black History Month is that it had its roots here, right, in this building, perhaps out in that hallway. Of course, Woodson had his BA from did work at the University of Chicago, and he was here and he was familiar with the city. He was here in September 1915, for a huge convention celebrating the end of the Civil War and the freedom of former enslaved people as a result of the 13th Amendment and the like. And so he's at this meeting at the Coliseum Auditorium, which is over roughly around 16th and Wabash. It's a dog park, the Coliseum Dog Park over there. And he goes to this event, and he's here with a colleague from Washington, D.C. named William Hartgrove. Mm-hmm. And Woodson was a principal at the time, high school principal. And he goes to the event, as most people did, and there's thousands of people standing outside trying to get into this convention center. And I think the fascinating thing about this story is that there's hundreds, if not thousands of people there talking about Black history, Black culture, and just how far the so-called Negro at that time had come since the end of slavery, the 50 years after the end of slavery. So Woodson comes back to the Wabash Y, which he had an office, he and Hartgrove, and he meets with the person who runs the Y, Alexander Jackson, who we'll talk about a little bit, James Stamps, who was an economist, and George Cleveland Hall, who was a very prominent surgeon. And they come up with this meeting about starting this organization to preserve, promote, publish, and really tell the story of African and African American people in the United States, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I think, there's so many things that are overlooked mm-hmm. in our history, yeah. are not taught in textbooks. Mm-hmm. When I was doing research for the platform that we launched, I just was amazed at how many amazing things mm-hmm. that Black people were doing, yeah. but at the same time they were being held back by systematic upsets. Yeah. And just what can you say for the progress of those same systems that were holding us back? Do you see Do you see improvement, or are we continually regressing?
Well, that's really another good question. I think part of understanding Bronzeville, the Black experiences here in the United States, but really our community in particular, is that the neighborhood developed as largely a city within the city. So in spite of institutional and structural racism that in hyper-segregation that hemmed Black people into this particular neighborhoods in these 5 enclaves here in the South and West Side of Chicago, there was a considerable amount of agency that was available, that was operating in our community. Black people, instead of being passive victims of racism, actively fought to create their own institutions, like the Y, which helped with the help of Julius Rosenwald, of course, but throughout the neighborhood as a way to create these cultural and political and social spaces in which their community could thrive and develop and have these very vital communications and about entrepreneurship and education and family life in spite of racism. And I think today, Black people are still doing some of the same things, where we're creating our own organizations and institutions, remaining independent, trying to develop our own economic base, our political base. And I think that's largely a story of what we've been doing since 1619 or 1657, where you think about when Black people first ended up on this continent, on this country would become America. We've always made our way. The Y is one of these things. It came out of this community idea, this pushing Julius Rosenwald to do some things as they did with the Hall Library and the Rosenwald apartments. You make demands for better treatment, and you see who listens, and you keep agitating for it.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. I'm currently right now, I'm taking a civic engagement class, and it blows my mind how much the content that I'm learning isn't applied in real life, like especially in Black and brown neighborhoods. So how do you think that civic engagement can be strengthened, not only within Bronzeville, but like the city at large?
Well, I'm going to tell a story real quick about A.L. Jackson. So A.L. Jackson, of course, he ran the Y. I think he was, for our case, one of these big civic engagement people, right? Because outside of being what people like Robert Abbott, who founded the Defender, would call a race man, he was very much into the development and movement of for his people. So again, he was very the Y as an important site during the Great Migration was one of these centers, these clearinghouses for new migrants who came here, which is under his leadership. After he leaves the YMCA, he was a Harvard trained. He graduated from Harvard. He knew Woodson from there. He was a huge athlete. There was a long history about track, people running track here at the Y. There used to be a running track in the gym over there. So it was that was part of his mission, part of his life. But think about civic engagement. Again, important clearinghouse for the Great Migration. After the race riots in 1919, he worked with the packing house owners to provide resources, a pay house here for people who were impacted by the race riot, Black people who were impacted by the race riot. He went around lecturing the city clubs and various political leaders, both Black and white, about how to help new migrants, Black migrants, adjust to city life and get acclimated to city, the economy and jobs and so forth, and politics and the like. He goes off and he helps form the Chicago Urban League, which was, again, a very important and continues to be a very important organization to civic engagement here in the city of Chicago. Leaves the Chicago Urban League, goes to the National Urban League, again, to expand these programs nationally, and then comes back here and works with probably one of the most important Black newspapers in the 20th century, the Chicago Defender, right, as one of their directors there. So, we talk about civic engagement in the Y in particular. A.L. Jackson, I think, is one of these people we don't talk enough about. And I think today, how do we motivate civic engagement? I think that's a crux of larger crux of your question. Is that I think, and this may seem a little bit biased, there's a need for understanding our history, and that one of the great thing about Woodson, and I'll keep coming back to Woodson, right? One of the great thing about Woodson is Woodson had, when he developed Negro History Week, which became Black History Month, his philosophy was we must move past the study of just great men of history. And history is made by people who are oftentimes voiceless, right? And so he wanted to integrate the stories of the ordinary men and women Black people who were making important choices, doing very extraordinary things to advance our history. So I say all that to come back to, if community leaders, young ones in particular, don't have this base to see how the roads that they're trotting down now had been paved by earlier generation. If they understood that, it would make their activism a bit easier because they're able to turn to the lessons of history in order to inform their civic engagement right now. But the problem is we don't teach history very well. We don't teach Black history very well because I think the overarching sentiment is that Black history is painful history. But I think what these activists can learn today is that there are lessons in pain and there are lessons in trauma which they need to go back to understand, how these people who came before them were able to overcome. These ordinary men and women were able to overcome very extraordinary circumstances in order to be successful.
I agree. Yeah. I think a lot of times the best lessons come from observing the lives of others and just taking what happened to them and trying not to repeat the negative, but to expand upon the positive. And I think also, change starts with organization, community organization in specific. And so, I mean, right now, I think community organizers they're at a crossroads because the political arena right now is really weird, and a lot of people get tongue-tied because they don't know what to say, or whether or not it's politically correct. And so, in your experience, how did community organization look back when Carter G. Woodson was first forming, this historic moment, and how does it look now? Has regression happened, or are we on par?
Well, that's okay. So what I think I hear you asking is really to compare the types of environments. I think people in Woodson's generation were more likely and had a freer space to talk about racial issues than we do right now. Because I think everyone understood that segregation existed and Jim Crow was not just simply a Southern phenomenon. Right. I think there's tons of studies now talking about really Jim Crow North and how did Jim Crow in that environment operate in the urban North. Right. But I also think that Black leaders like A. Philip Randolph and to some degree King and Whitney Young and Walter White and Addie Wyatt, and those folks, they were more able to articulate their complaints about racial discrimination then because they had really less to lose, right? And speaking truth to power. I think Woodson would say he was trying to speak truth to power. Just a bit of his background. Woodson was what we would call a cantankerous individual, and he made no qualms about how critical he was of not only his own research in his own life but other people's research. It was very famous stories about he going after Du Bois, who was very much an activist of his time. I think today the problem that we experience, and this is by no means to besmirch anyone's chosen profession, but I think the problem we have now is that Black people and Black agitation has switched from protest to politics. I think when we were able to enter into that political world, and here in Chicago, Black people have been engaged in the highest levels of politics since John Jones came here in the 1850s, 1860s. So Black people have always been involved in politics. But I think now maintaining political power has the potential of diluting these really important social voices that our leadership brings. But again, to harken back to something you asked me earlier, we can't solely rely on our politicians and our elected officials to lead us through the racial wilderness, right? So I think that there's this fine line in that ordinary individuals, and this is what was a great thing about this Woodson's generation, is that ordinary individuals, especially here in Chicago, saw themselves as political actors and actresses and didn't rely on elected officials to do things for them.
I think that speaks so much truth, right? Because one of the things that I didn't understand as a kid that I always heard was, no one's going to come and save Black people.
Right.
Black people have to save themselves. And I understand what that means now. And I think a lot of that is in, right, like representation. These institutions that we rely on, these bureaucracies that we rely on, I think there's not enough representation, not enough Black representation, and our cultural significance has been diluted by other actors who don't understand why our culture is the way it is. And so can you speak on how can we maintain cultural relevance in a time period where we're told that it doesn't, that our culture doesn't matter?
Well, yeah, I think what we saw coming out of the Blake murder was that there is this movement by corporate America and the power brokers to embrace racial diversity, at least publicly now, right? I think a lot of times they would do it privately or in spaces which they can kind of ignore it and poo-poo it away. But I think now with, after Breonna Taylor and all of these other tragedies, I think there's a concerted effort to try to address some of these things. But I want to bring it back again to Black History Month, Negro History Week. And one of the reasons why Woodson chose February was the week that coincided between Frederick Douglass's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And I want to use a quote by Frederick Douglass to talk about how can we keep the pressure on. And Douglass will always talk about, in his views of politics, agitate, agitate, agitate. And now that the door has been pried open for others outside of our communities to realize that, we essentially do matter and our existence does matter, right? It's incumbent upon all of us to hold their feet to the fire. I think it's not enough to go out and vote every 4 years if we don't attend meetings and we don't agitate and if we don't lobby our own politicians to do the things that are in the best interest of the community. That's
true. Speaking of community, how has the atmosphere of community here in Bronzeville changed over the years, in your opinion?
So I've been living in the neighborhood for almost 20 years. So we call it the bad old days of, and I think that I think early on there was this really sense of pride of reclaiming the neighborhoods of our ancestors. I would always say I live in Bronzeville, not because I study Bronzeville, because this is where my people are from. So I think there's an immense degree of pride that, especially this generation of buppies, so, you had the yuppies and the buppies back in the 80s, right? But I think this current generation of buppies and early urban Black pioneers coming back to Bronzeville, I think there's a level of excitement. Clearly, the housing bubble of 2008 kind of did something to that. But I think for those of us who believe in having Black cultural spaces and Black spaces, I think there's witnessing gentrification is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it increases our investment. It brings much needed resources to the community. But there's always this fear that Black people can be pushed out. And I think it's finding a way to strike that necessary balance between investment and improvement, but cultural significance. I think it's very important that Congressman Rush is reintroducing the Bronzeville Heritage Site Bill again. I think there's a potential for major Black investment, but if Black people in the community are not at the table, we stand to be locked out of that. So again, we have to make sure that we stay informed. One of the things our ancestors were doing, they were very savvy politically, even if they weren't in the central part of the political process. Remain informed, ask questions, ask critical questions, and hold our leaders and our officials and our developers accountable to our demands and what our vision for our community.
Yeah, I think, you bring up gentrification. In my studies, I've learned that a lot of people, especially people who are not inclined to urban lingo don't understand what gentrification is. Gentrification is this process in which an outside group completely replaces, the original population. So the difference between gentrification, right, and revitalization,
Right.
It's two different things. I sometimes sit and scratch my head about how can black people retain ownership of what was originally their home and their land. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, make sure that when grandma and grandpa die, that you pull your resources to pay that $3,000-$4,000 for property taxes. Number one, I've never people who lost their ancestral homes because no one wanted to step up and pay the property taxes on our own home. And the second thing, I think we have to reconsider what wealth means. It's easy to see a get-rich-quick scheme when you have your parents' home and you can sell it for a quick dollar. I think we have to keep our eyes on the prize for what the community is in for going forward. There's a house across the street from me that sold for $725,000 a couple of months ago.
Wow.
That was unheard of. I've never heard of anything in this neighborhood $725,000 until I started walking during the COVID era, and then I saw condos along King Drive $700,000. We got to play chess and not checkers, and that's how you maintain control. You play chess and not checkers, and don't try to get out of the neighborhood quick to make a quick buck, because there's history here, and people pay a premium for history.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, right? I don't think a lot of people. I think a lot of people set their bars low when it comes to leadership. And so, what forms of leadership within the Black community do you think are most transformative?
All politics are local, right? And I think that we have aldermen, and I like my aldermen. But I think that there's more to be done at the community level. I think if we take control of our blocks, form block clubs, keep our neighborhoods, get to our neighbors to, lobby City Hall and use our city services, call the police when we see something, and call 311 when the lot down the street from your house is dirty or you need street cleaning. Call the alderman, go to their office, get engaged in what they're doing. But, talk to your neighbors. I think we go a long way about controlling our own political, just by talking to our neighbors and working with these institutions, churches, community groups. Other folks in our neighborhood are trying to do good in the hood, and engage with them. All politics are local, and sometimes it's as local as your block.
I agree. I think there's so many intricate things that happen within neighborhoods. One of the things that really bothers me is that we've kind of, within our own neighborhoods, we've kind of lost a sense of being in each other's lives, and forming relationships that fortify the built environment. And so what are some, I don't know, what are some easy ways Black folks can remain in each other's lives in valuable ways?
Yeah. I think there's a long history to that. I was just teaching about that the other day about, this is nothing new, because again, since, African people came to this country, we've been engaged in these conversations about where we fit. And I think we get to the point when residential segregation is deemed unconstitutional, and see affirmative action programs, and we move into these spaces that we weren't allowed in. And we bought into the idea of what America is, and America has always been one of these nations that have been prided itself on rugged individualism,
Right.
which really runs counter to what most West African people lived. They're more of a communal, these community groups. Hyper segregation forced Black people to remain in each other's lives because we were all forced to live to each other. But as we were able to move into more of these white spaces, we embodied what it was to be an American, and this idea of competing against each other. Black people need to come back to the ideas. I know your question was what tangible idea. I don't know, but I think what we need to be articulating is that we have to realize that capitalism just has destroyed the fabric of what our ancestors embodied when they came here. They had to rely on each other, and we have to come back to those things. We can't. It's not enough to sit back and say that they won't give us, whoever that they is, won't give us something. We have to understand that we come as a community. We come together to protect our spaces and protect our institutions in our own economic development. I think one of the things one of the relatively important parts of the YMCA is not just a place where, people would go for recreation. And I talked about, the Great Migration and the like, but as a kid, I always hear these stories about that my grandmother would tell me about the importance of art and culture, especially during the Chicago Black Renaissance.
Right.
And William Edmund Scott is perhaps one of the most important painters of that generation. And, when the building reopened, I was a graduate school at the University of Iowa, and my only connection to home was WGN on my cables. And I happened to watch the news one day, and I saw about the restoration of this particular piece here. And it took a while to realize just how important Scott was. And I think having a cultural space like the Wabash Y allowed our kids, our community, to have access to world-renowned artists and writers. And the Y is as a heritage organization with the Southside Community Arts Center, which is right across the street, with the George Cleveland Hall Library, which is like these three very important cultural spaces that allowed our community to engage with Nat King Cole and Gwendolyn Brooks and Margaret Walker and Margaret Burroughs and Richard Wright and Zora Neale Hurston came in and just the collections of papers and documents that were collected, telling our story at the George Cleveland Hall Library. The location and the history of this space right here is vastly important for understanding who we are not only as Black Chicagoans, but as African Americans in this country. There weren't many cultural spaces like the Y that was in existence. When Woodson was here, he was here for a purpose. This was a place in which he could work. He had a degree from the University of Chicago, but he couldn't work in Hyde Park. He comes here. And I think that's some of the important things. We provided and created these spaces where lovers of art and culture could feel free to create these pieces. And it was a huge deal when they uncovered and cleaned this Scott mural up. Murals have played a very important role in Black culture and Black life. I think one of the most popular muralists we had is maybe Charles White of this generation. He was a little bit after Scott, but Scott and Archibald Motley and all these Black Chicago artists, and having this work in our neighborhood. Now this is museum quality stuff. I mean, Scott was in the countless museums across the country. His work, and we had it in a public space in the heart, where our children, our people can come and just look at these things and appreciate and see these positive images of themselves. I think the great thing that occurs here is that coming out of a few years after the Harlem Renaissance, and we see him in the 1930s. No one in this painting is a laborer, is an agriculturer, is a farmhand, or work. These are all people at recreational space. They're at the beach. They're scouts. My son's a scout. We're active in the scouting. There's ministers. There's musicians. No one is out there doing agriculture work. No one's out there working the steel mills or the stockyards. Those were the experience. Those are part of our realities, our social realities. These are the ideals. It gives a very paints a very different picture, no pun intended, about what Black people could and ought to do and ought to expect out of our lives. And just having this painting restored and back in a public space, and really, talking about the ideals of the YMCA, it's important. Was it heart, mind, and hand, right? And those are important. Those are important aspects of who we are. And just provide this alternative of this is what we could be doing. Yeah. In the Jim Crow segregated spaces and realities, those shouldn't have to be the norms.
That's true. I mean, I think imagery is so important.
It's powerful.
It's very powerful, and I think right now we have in the media a lot of just negativity. And I love when I first started working here, I came in here and I was like, wow, that's so cool. I was like, I don't get to see stuff like this every day. My mom, she would always tell me, she was like, I want you to be better than I am. And so positivity, even though there was a whole bunch of negativity around me, I had that one piece of, okay, this is what I should strive for. I think every Black person should be encouraged and should want to come and see stuff like this. And which is why I'm really excited, because when things find some kind of normalcy again, we're gonna be doing tours in here, and I can't wait to just show people this and tell them that this is who we are, and this is what we stand for. So I really do. I agree.
There's a story about Margaret Burroughs, and Margaret Burroughs, of course, is an immensely renowned, important figure in Black culture and art and poetry and all that. I had the opportunity to meet her at the Lake Meadows Art Fair about 10, 11 years ago. And I saw her, I was buying art, but then I saw this little old lady at a card table, very nondescript. She looked familiar, I wasn't quite sure who she was. So I took my daughter was 4 years old at the time, so we go there, and we started talking to her, and she had a stack of lithographs of her work, and she signs it. And I said, oh my God, it's Margaret Burroughs, right? So she rolls them up, put a rubber band around them, and hands it to my daughter. And I said, how much is that? I'm thinking Margaret Burroughs is going to cost me. And she says, it's free. And what I found out later is that she had this philosophy that all Black people need to have fine art in their house, have access to fine art, right? And I think it goes back, you're 100% right. How we see ourselves in popular media is important for us changing the paradigm about who people tell us we should be. And I think to go back to the association, one of the things that people don't really know about us is that we set the Black History Month theme every year. So when the presidential proclamation comes out and talks about themes, they come to us to get these these ideas and suggestions. And this year happens to be, the theme is the Black family. So we're engaging these year-long conversations about representation, about what the Black family looks like in all ways, shapes, or forms. So that's one of the things. So talking about Burroughs, talking about these spaces and bringing families in, that's one of the things that Asala does as well. We try to make these academic exercises and bring them into the community.
Well, I would love to do more work with Asala and bridge, Asala and TRC together, because, we do work in this historic building and in historic neighborhood, and we really do, we serve a majority Black population, and so we want them to know that this is your history, and this is why you should be proud to be Black in America. I think, stuff like art, I love it. We actually had a few Margaret Burroughs prints for the silent auction last go around for our gala, and I just was looking at them and I was like, wow,
she was
that's
so talented,
really cool.
so talented.
So talented.
And I think the connection between TRC, our plaque is in 2015, we had our centennial, and I think our opening was here. The opening event we had was right here, and we were so proud to put the plaque up on the wall, on the staircase. And I think our members still ask about coming down to the Y. And say, Lionel, can we get this to the Y? I said, I know some people, big time. I know some people get down there and see the plaque and take pictures outside of the building. It's important for us.
Yeah, well, we welcome it. And my last question will just be a fun question. Out of all of the founders of the African American, I always mess up the name.
The association?
The association.
For study of African
Yeah.
American life? Yeah, okay.
Out of all of those, out of all the founders, which one is your favorite?
Oh, I think that the politically correct answer would be Woodson.
Okay.
But Woodson was an Omega and I'm a Sigma, so I'm not gonna give him that much credit. But I think that I think the more and more I learned about Jackson, the more I was a shot putter. I'm a track guy, and he was a track athlete. But I think the most realist guy of all of that will probably be George Cleveland Hall.
Okay.
I think and I think Hall was a very important doctor. He took over Providence after Daniel Hill Williams left. But he did a lot for just outside the association. He was president of the association, one of the first presidents of the association. But I think the stories my grandmother would tell me about the importance of the George Cleveland Hall Library and having that black library in spaces where black kids can go to read positive images about themselves. I hold Hall in that library very near and dear to me because of the stories that my ancestors told me about that building and Vivian Harsh and Charlemagne Rollins and all of the stuff that was going on in that building.
Wow.
Which is very important. So
I do have one more question, actually. So what in the association's actions right now, in their being, in what ways can people get involved in what the association is doing, and what events or maybe happenings are coming up for the association?
Well, that's a good question. We have a Chicago branch which we're reorganizing now. So it's one of the oldest branches. I think it was 1921 or so. But depending on when people see this, we have a virtual Black History Festival, which are all available on Asala TV on YouTube. We have a Asala TV channel on YouTube, ASALH TV. Go to YouTube. And we have a number of free events going on. We have one paid event on the 27th. It's a conversation with Skip Gates, our national president, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, both at Harvard. And Evelyn is probably one of the preeminent Black women scholars, historians ever. Another connection she has with Chicago, she received a Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama right before he leaves office. So she's a dynamic person. But I always say Asala is great because we're an independent organization. And we've been independent for 106 years. We haven't taken any university money. We fund ourselves. And I think one of the things we can't complain about our organizations dying if we don't support them. So I would always encourage people to support Asala. Go to asalh.org/join, join the association. Come into our Black History Month Festival. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're pushing for 10,000 members. We had moved from 1,100 to about 1,900 members in 2 weeks just during Black History Month. So we're on a road to 10,000. We developed that channel during the pandemic because we heard that there were parents looking for culturally relevant programming for kids during e-learning. So where there is no way, Black people make a way. So we provide to put our services out there. But join Asala, join an organization in your community, go to a meeting, engage in conversations about who we are.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
This has been an amazing time to just sit and talk and reflect. I think reflection a lot of the time leads to healing, and healing leads to success, and just a greater sense of self-worth.
I believe.
So thank you so much for doing this, and we look forward to having more conversations like this.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
All right.
Hey y'all, please take some time out and visit www.livinglandmark.org for all kinds of great content, including our platform that we just launched for Black History Month. Has a lot of cool pictures and videos, and just overall layout of this historical Wabash YMCA. And if you have interest in donating or volunteering, there are options on our website to support us in those ways. Just visit our website and sign up, and someone will be in contact with you quickly. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a blessed day.